Okay, so we'll just move rapidly also to look at economic growth and economic development. So we want to see this section, can you see my slide, please?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we want to look at economic growth and economic development. All right. So having look at the Rowstow's theory of growth, we want to look at the difference between economic growth and economic development. Are they the same? Do they mean the same thing? All right. Does economic growth apply to economic development? All right. And this is a key question you must, because in the exam, you will be asked to compare between economic growth and economic development, all right, and identify the differences, or all right, between economic growth and economic development. All right, you need to pay close attention. So, as I've mentioned, that societies are dynamic, right? In the sense that no society is stagnant, right? And this is possible because of the changing needs of individuals, right? And their desires to meet such needs. So their societies, of course, we also say that history is not is not a predictable no discipline. History is a dynamic phenomenon that deals with changes and continuity. All right. So growth and development are therefore expressions of the changes in society, just as the economy also constitutes, the foundation or superstructure of society. So, economy actually governs the politics, the social. All right, it is the economy that drives the changes, that propels the changes that you see in society. Without the economy, without commerce, without trading, without income, without no revenue, all right, without capital, no society will probably be developed. So it is the driving force. Economy is the driving force behind any form of development that you can speak about. In any, you may have military power, but if you don't have economic power, you are just making noise. All right, because without, how would you procure your arms and ammunition? How would you feed your population? Okay, so in this course, we're trying to discuss economic growth to identify the factors that affect economic growth and also discuss economic development also. Right? Are you following? Are you seeing my slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that economic growth, we look at economic growth. What is economic growth? All right. So economic growth is the quantitative increase or expansion of production or output in a given economy or society over a period of time. It is the level, all right, in quantitative terms, statistical terms, the level of output, all right, of production of goods and services in a particular, given economy or country, if you like. So it is the total amount also of production and wealth in an economy. How rich, what is the level of production? How much oil is Dangote refinery producing? All right. How much goods or services is MTN generating, or say Globalcom? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So it is the total amount of production of wealth in an economy over a relatively protracted time frame. And this can be explained, in different ways. So it could be in terms of per capita income, right? Which is what is due to the individual and the economy, all right? And realized also by the gross domestic product. So societies are usually measured in terms of these critical indices. All right, what are these indices? The per capita income. All right, so we'll tell you how what level of growth is occurring in that particular. So per capita income is what is due to the individual in an economy. All right, and also is usually divided by the gross domestic product. If you say the GDP of Nigeria, for instance, hypothetically, in 2025 was 15 trillion. All right, how is that? If that is divided by the number of population, what is the population of Nigeria now? That's about 230 million people. If that's 15 trillion, for instance, is divided by the number of population. How much will accrue to individual, to Alima in that class, or to Olamide, or to Ebenezer, or to Ayomide in that class. All right, that is exactly what growth is about. All right, so it is a system in which the total value of goods and services produced in a country over a period of time, you know, uh, is is quantified to say that. So you could see oftentimes you see the Bureau of Statistics, all right, the government side in government circles, because Nigeria's economy has grown by 5.2%. All right, so it is a quantitative measuring of the performance of an economy, right? And this gives the income per capita, income per number, of people in the society, all right, and as all things being equal, basically. So we want to what are the factors that drives economic growth? What are the propellers of economic growth in society? All right, if you take a leap from the other topic we treated, so there are a number of factors that are indicators that a country is experiencing growth. One of them is natural resources. Okay, so some nations, there are many countries, especially in Africa. In fact, there is no country that does not have natural resources. And I'm going to explain. Some nations are better endowed than others. That's just the limitation. In Africa, many African countries have immense natural resources. You want to talk about Nigeria, large deposit of oil. All right, you have the uranium in Niger, you have gold in Nigeria, you have all kinds of in Democratic Republic of Congo. All of the natural resources that are the key factor in modern industries or industrialization are in the Congo. These are the indices of economic growth. But the question we want to ask is, does natural resources account, does it translate, all right, automatically into development or into growth? All right, so there are countries that have these large natural resources but are very poor. Dr. Congo, which I've mentioned, Democratic Republic of Congo, is the richest spot on earth as we speak, but it is one of the poorest country under the sun. It has all kind of mineral resources that are used for modern technologies, either in the construction of your iPhone, the computer technology, the aircraft technology, all kind of stuff. But this society is one of the most underdeveloped. You can go online after the class and check out Dr. Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, just like Nigeria. Nigeria, a country that has been trading oil since 1950, since when oil was first discovered in Oloibiri. It's one of the poorest country, in spite of all the artificial economic, analysis and projections, pushed forward by, political elites. Another factor that shapes economic growth is capital resources. So it is usually known that nations that have large stock of capital and high rate of accumulation usually grow faster than others. Example, the United States of America, all right, the European countries, Western Europe, right, China. So these countries have capital resources that have been able to build, large gold reserves, all right, over the years, large stock of gold or capital as a form of capital savings, all right, and this helps them in a way to have some level of leverage that's okay because of the you can call it foreign reserve or a country's domestic reserve, all right. Because of this, we can have you can increase our consumption level, right? How much, and so these countries also have high rate of accumulation. They accumulate other, continue to take, and these countries go faster. All right. The third factor is the science and technology, which is also so no country can develop without science. I mentioned that. All right. Europe, by the medieval era, as I've mentioned, when there was absence of science and technology, was they live in what is known as the Dark Ages. It was with the revival of knowledge, Renaissance, that the the various forms of revolution took place in Europe, in Britain, as I've mentioned. So effective use of science and technology are a central determinant of economic growth. All right, for any country to be developed, there has to be some measure of, a large measure of uh, funding of science and technology, not in Africa where there's poor incentives for research and development for science and technology. All right, today the Minister of Education is swinging forth and back, saying this science, no, and all of that. No funding, no lecturer is being funded to do research. No research institute is given. No, when many research institutes are even owed salaries, so no society can develop beyond the level of the science, the investment in science and technology. So you can see why countries like China continue to move so heights. They continue to, develop rapidly. The United States, the level of investment in science. All right. So I'm here in Oxford, not because I use my money or because, no, it is a serious country. All right, like UK, all right, and the serious university who prioritize knowledge, that sought to see that, okay, there's a value in this scholar from Africa. Can he come to Oxford, right, to interact, to have exchange of ideas, to teach, all right, to influence, to share his knowledge? So this is how countries develop. So we are about 40 from all over the world that we came, the same time for this fellowship, right? How many of such African countries can do the same, to say that we want to create funds for a fellowship for scholars from Europe, from Japan, from US, from China to come to University of Ibadan or University of Lagos to exchange, to teach technological transfer. Many countries that are developed today, take for instance Japan, developed not because it it was able to breed its own technology. There was what they call technological transfer. They imbibed, they sent most of their scholars out to go and learn Western sciences and technology. They brought in people to their country. To China today, the the engine room of China's innovation is people from outside coming. Western countries relocate their factories to China, all right, to develop. So science and technology, no country can develop without that, and that is why the bane of many African societies, African countries. Another factor is population and labor resources. When we're teaching, I mentioned Adam Smith, and it's a book you have to read, an inquiry into the nature, all right, and the wealth of nation. All right. In that, Adam Smith highlighted also all of these factors that I'm stating. Population and labor resources is a key, a significant factor in the country's, attainment of economic growth. Countries that have skilled population, not just population like you have in Nigeria, where from one section of the country they are breeding bandits, all right, in the name of amajiris and all this stuff. You have, all right, where people are just giving birth to children who turn out to be bandits. No, in a serious country, a skilled large population, all right, a large skilled population contributes to growth, all right. They are the engine room, the machines of industrialization, the labor, the skilled labor, because the population, all right, grow up to fit into various sectors of the economy, in industries, manufacturing, agriculture, mining, all right, teaching, in various service sectors. So not in Africa where a large chunk of populations which have grown massively are thrown on the streets, and when they don't have stuff to do, they resort to banditry, to to terrorism and all the stuff. And also not even in the southern parts where that is not taking place. You have population that is growing, the TikTok generation, the TikTok, the Instagram. Everybody wants to make money on Instagram, on TikTok, by shaking breast and bum bum. All right, this no society grows by this parameter. You cannot come if I pick up my Google or go to my any social media here to go. There are processes they have to scrutinize to be sure that, are you under 18? Can you do this? Are you eligible to use this? But in Nigeria, everybody operate a TikTok, and the TikTok operation is not done all right as it is used in other climes where it is used for pedagogical, for training, for learning, for skill acquisition. Everybody in Africa using TikTok is either shaking bum bum or breasts on the TikTok. What a disaster! What an existential catastrophe. People who should be productively engaged in science and technology. Large population indeed. Nigeria's population is the largest in Africa. It has been projected to reach 400 million by 2050. Imagine a 400 million people with more than half of them shaking bum bum on TikTok, showing chairs, the boys showing chairs and doing mundane, insignificant stuff on TikTok. How would that country develop? No, 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 no. No development. The richest, it was the late Miles Monroe who noted that the richest spot under the sun on earth is not the gold mine of Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or Yemen or the gold deposit of Ghana or the uranium all right, site of Dr. Congo or Niger or Chad. The richest spot, according to Miles Monroe, is the graveyard, where you see many songs never written, many invention never implemented, many arts never constructed, many ideas never realized, because the large population they are a distracted population, distracted, engaged on social media, on to TikTok. If you open your TikTok, the first 10 stuff that props up on my TikTok is Bong Bong, his big ass, his big boost. What kind of country or society are we growing? So population, labor resources, is a societies like the US or China that has a growing skilled population contribute to its growth. That is why they are the leading country. India, which also has a large, very large, about 1.3 billion. China, 1.4 billion. One would think that this population will be a problem. And you can see the folly of the theory we looked at last week, the Malthus theory, that when population is too much, it becomes a problem. No, but some countries have shown that the large population is even a resources, is an asset. China, where a large number, over 80% of its population are highly skilled, and you could see that all the product coming is you use, from your fan to your gadget, they are from China, because everybody is productively engaged in manufacturing in the industries, not on TikTok and Instagram. So participation in the world economic system also enables nation to export and import. No country can be an island. All right, you cannot say that I want to maintain the principle of isolationism or non-interventionism. I want to be alone. No, you would be reckless, you'll be poor. So every country must interact. When we look at world economic system too, capitalism and socialism, you see that all right, there has to be free participation in the global economic system, the global division of labor. Right, I've mentioned in the last class David Ricardo's comparative advantage theory. You need to go and read Ricardo. So another thing is the structure of the economy, how the production system is distributed, especially among sectors, also contributes to growth. And there is minimal growth once there is too much emphasis on agriculture and primary activities. So because this is the traditional stage, any countries that want to develop must move beyond the traditional stage, agriculture and primary activities. You have to move beyond cultivating cocoa and exporting the cocoa. A country must be able to refine the cocoa into chocolate, into beverages, into juices, into fruit juice, into alcoholic drinks, and export them. That is exactly the structure of the economy. So a subsistent agrarian economy cannot grow. All right. Even if you are practicing agriculture, if agriculture is the critical comparative advantage, you have to produce the agriculture in a way that you are not exporting it in its raw state. You have to refine it into finished goods. All right. Well, Nigeria has been producing cocoa, or West Africa has been producing cocoa since the 19th century without a functioning chocolate industry, a very vibrant chocolate industry. All right. So the market for chocolate, the manufacturers of chocolate are in Singapore, they're in Switzerland, but the countries which produce this are very poor because no country develop on the basis of primary production. You have to take it to the secondary and tertiary processes. Adequate planning, all right, also encourages growth. Then political stability. No, instability drives investment away. How can you have economic growth in Africa, in Nigeria, where banditry is a recurring decimal, is an everyday reality? Bandit people cannot even the farming, the so-called primary activities, the traditional stage cannot be done at its efficient level, at its maximum level. People cannot even go to the farm. That country cannot develop. Is to continue to borrow, to continue to rely on external funds and stuff to survive. Political instability drives it chases investment away. When there is no overthrow of government today, another government comes tomorrow, or there's the atmosphere is so tense. How would you explain a situation in the southeast Nigeria where every Monday over the past 5 6 years have been declared a public holiday because of to agitation for Biafran cause? You shut down banks, you shut down factories and industries on Monday, the very prime day of the week, because you are trying to celebrate Biafra Day or something dedicated to Biafran cause. That is nonsense. That is stupidity. Do you understand? So that cannot engender growth. And a country, a state, a country allows that to thrive over 5 years is antithetic to scientific development. No country can develop on the basis of that. So having look at economic growth, we look at economic development. What is economic development? Economic development, therefore, is concerned with uh, the effect of expansion, all right, the expansion of output on quality of life. So that is a contradiction between economic growth and economic development. While economic growth deals with economic growth deals with quantitative growth, right? In those statistical indices, the GDP, gross domestic product, the GNP, gross national product, the per capita income, the balance of payment, balance of trade, all of those stuffs. Economic growth deals with qualitative improvement in the standard of living of people in terms of the improvement of food, water, supplies, energy, communication, transport, housing, healthcare, education, and improvements in the life expectancy. So economic development deals with the physical quality of life of the people in that economy. All right. It deals with the translation of economic growth. All of those indices like uh, the indices such as uh, gross domestic product, gross national product. Economic growth tells you how does this economy, okay, for instance, look at what is happening in Nigeria presently, where it is said that our economy is growing, dollar has come down to 1,300, but there is still skyrocketing inflation. Inflation is still soaring high. All right. And so would you say that all what government is saying, is there a reflection of that in the everyday realities of these people? All right, so there can be economic growth without it translating into economic development. That is the point I'm trying to make. So you can have increased foreign reserve, balance of trade. You can have GDP can increase by whatever percent, might not translate into economic development. That's exactly the point that I'm trying to generate in this discussion. Do you understand? So development in this place, it has to do with the promotion of more intensive advanced economic activities. All right, when there is promotion of intensive and advanced economic activities the country is said perhaps to have developed. So economic development could also involve institutional and ideological changes, which enables people to uh, people, all right, to maximize their potential, right? When there are institutional policies, all right, policies that discourages youth from engaging in illicit activities, yahoo yahoo, all right, fast wealth without industry, without no business, without one tenable commercial activities, or fast wealth derived basically from TikTok, from shaking bomb bomb and bust on the TikTok. So when there is an institutional or ideological paradigms that shapes the way people engage in productive activities, no economic development could have said to have developed. All right. So development, in fact, is the mobilization and management of the resources of a nation's natural resources, natural and human resources, for the progress of that society. So when there is efficient mobilization of resources, you have large population, yes. You have large mineral resources, yes. But how are you deploying these natural resources, all right, to develop your country? It is a process of increasing and sustaining the capacity of a nation or society to meet its economic, social obligation. All right. So it is how a society also uh, could be described as the sustainable increase. So economic growth reflecting the standard of living. It's in the living standard of people, which implies per capita income, better education, quality health care, efficient transport and communication system, railway, airlines, environmental protection, and all of this. So a society can be said to have developed when all this happen. So you may have growth, you may have GDP, but even all the GDP and all the growth, all the money coming from the GDP improvements are being concentrated in the hands of a few elite or looted, right? Would there be development? So many African countries are indeed rich, right? But some of those wealths do not translate, right? There is no equitable redistribution of the resources of the wealth in such nations. So that is why they remain so poor. All right. So development occurs with the reduction in the reduction and elimination of poverty, inequality, unemployment, misery, right, among within a growing economy. That is what development. So in this course, you must be able to differentiate the difference between economic growth and economic development. So economic growth deals with quantitative improvements in the nation's means of production, right? Quantitative growth in the supply, in the export or export of goods, all right, like natural primary products like agriculture, all right, or statistical improvement in the GDP. Oh, there's increased trade activities. Sorry, I have to connect my laptop to line. So if there is increased commercial activities, which improves the capital or revenue of the country, without that revenue translating to improvements in the quality of healthcare, education, infrastructure, and all of that reduction of misery and inequality, the country has is said not to have been developed. So we have discussed the factors that determines economic growth and you know development in different societies. So we've said that economic growth is the quantitative increase or expansion of production or output in a given economy. It is the total of the amount of production and wealth in an economy over a period of time, while economic development is concerned with the expansion of output on quality of life, especially in terms of improvement of food and water supplies, energy consumption, housing, healthcare, etc. If you have any question at this juncture, you can ask, please. Any question? Any question? Any question?
No, sir.
Okay. If there are no questions, then we'll see you. I'll see you in the next class. Thank you.
All right, sir.